Okay, so hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar on technology as a global public good and service for the SDGs. My name is Adriana Bankston, and I'm currently the Chief Outreach Officer for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. I would like to thank our partners for this webinar, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UN Conference on Trade and Development, UN Major Group for Children and Youth, Global Young Academy, ETC Group, and Civil Society Financing for Development Group. We're really grateful for this collaborative effort, and we're eager to start the discussion today. So just to begin, I want to tell you a little bit about JSPG. So we are an internationally recognized open access peer-reviewed research publication and a 501c3 nonprofit organization. But more than that, we're also a professional development tool for early career researchers in science policy. We are managed by and for students, policy fellows, and early career scholars of all academic and professional backgrounds. And we encourage students and early career scholars to engage and contribute to the policymaking process at all levels of government. And you can see our Twitter and website here. We publish a variety of different write-ups. So you can see here, OPEDs, technology assessments, policy memos, analyses, as well as white papers, book reviews, workshop proceedings, and other research articles concerning every corner of science and technology policy. We really try to support both national and international initiatives to help students and early career scholars engage with science and technology policy. And we publish 2 standard issues and 2 to 4 special topics issues per year, similarly to the one that, that you will hear about today from JSPG and UNMGCY. And we're really keen on publishing the work of students and early career scholars. And so a lot of publications have co-authors, but we require that they are first authors. And this is really something that is important to us. And our standard issue deadline coming up is November 15th. So I'm happy to answer more questions about JSPG as well. So I just want to go a little bit into context and logistics before we start the panels. I'm really happy to be moderating this webinar that features a lot of our authors from the joint special topics issue between JSPG and UNMGCY. We're really grateful to UNMGCY for their partnership, both for the issue and this webinar today. And I would like to extend a special thank you to Donovan Gutierrez from UNMGCY for working with me on planning this webinar, as well as Daiki Yoshioda for making the video that you're about to see, and Sahil Mehta, who is JSPG's Director of Communications, for making the graphics that you've been seeing on Twitter, and for promoting the webinar. We hope this event will be both informative and inspiring for all of you, and as we think about how to prioritize technology justice around the world. We are also eager to hear from you, as there will be ample opportunities to contribute. In terms of logistics, just to remind everyone, please mute your microphones during the presentations to reduce background noise. And please turn off the video to give attention to the speakers. We'd like the speakers and moderators to keep their videos on, but participants, please turn it off. Just to remind you, this webinar is being recorded, and we reserve the rights to share it after the event. If you have any issues, please let us know. So in terms of the event, you should see a link to the schedule in the chat, just so you can follow along what's happening. We will begin by showing you a video of the authors from the issue, followed by an introductory discussion with Elliott Harris, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist in the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We will then transition to the panel discussion moderated by Robert Lepenies from the Global Young Academy. And after the panel and Q&A, we'll move into breakout rooms for more focused discussions facilitated by some of the authors in the journal and additional resource people. And then we will share the key messages when we come back after the breakouts with everyone after at the close, before closing. And feel free to send your questions in the chat to the host, and we will try to address them as we go along. So with that, I'd like to highlight the authors from the Joint Special Topics issue who will be talking to you about their work in a video shortly. And you can find the link to the joint issue in the chat as well. So here we have George Profiliotis from the National Technical University of Athens, Greece, Jasmine Burton from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, Public Health, London, UK, Stuti Chakraborty from Christian Medical College in Vellore, India, Morgan Livingston from UC Berkeley, and Soheb Nanhak from the University of College London. With that, let's move on to the video. And hopefully you can all hear this.
My name is George Profitiotis, and I'm a PhD candidate at the National Technical University of Athens. My PhD work is currently exploring the ex-ante economic valuation of potential national planetary protection policies for private space missions. In my published policy memorandum, I proposed a novel framework to be undertaken by the United Nations system in order to prevent the contamination of the Earth with potential microorganisms from Mars and the contamination of Mars with terrestrial microorganisms. This kind of biological contamination may occur in the future through private space missions due to current legal and policy gaps. As the environmental goods on Earth and on Mars are non-excludable, we must make sure that the social costs and the social benefits of future private space missions will be balanced in a way that will promote equity, justice, and sustainable development both on Earth and in space.
Hey everyone, my name is Jasmine Burton and I am a 2017 Masters of Public Health graduate from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I'm a current contractor at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the founder and CEO of a sanitation social enterprise called Wish for Wash. I was thrilled to have my thesis from when I was studying at the London School of Hygiene be selected to be a part of this special issue about the impacts of emerging technology on inequality and sustainability. In this piece of work, I really delve into the global sanitation crisis by way of a toilet technology assessment in a particular informal settlement in Lusaka, Zambia. UN Water says that the 6th Sustainable Development Goal is essential for progress across all the other Sustainable Development Goals and vice versa. Therefore, investing in proven, sustainable, innovative frontier technologies in the water sanitation and hygiene space has profoundly positive implications and impacts across all of the other SDGs as it relates to global social inclusion, gender parity, health equity, and the environmental movement. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you so much for your time and support of my work, because everybody poops.
Hello everyone, my name is Stuti Chakraborty and I'm one of the contributing authors. I'm currently working as an occupational therapist involved in the rehabilitation of persons with disabilities in Christian Medical College, Vellore, India. My publication aims to address and highlight the existing inequities in accessibility and feasibility of implementing the use of assistive technologies for persons with disabilities in high income versus low and low-middle income countries. While the use of technology, specifically assistive technology, can significantly aid in the overall improvement in quality of life of persons with disabilities by reducing the impact it has on their daily lives, however, while comparing how such technologies are being made available to the differently able, there seems to be a huge gap with developed nations much ahead when compared to the developing world. Through my publication, I intend to shed some light on this issue, as well as suggest implementable recommendations that must be adopted into practice by the developing world, which, in my opinion, could help in reducing this gap. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Morgan Livingston, and I am an undergraduate at UC Berkeley and a research assistant in privacy and emerging technology policy. AI is shaped by choices on the data, the design, and its integration into existing social systems. But underserved populations are often misrepresented in data and underrepresented in the AI workforce. AI can increase the scale and accuracy of critical services, but AI can also replicate and amplify inequalities. By including diverse voices in the data collection, the development, and the governance decisions, we can not only mitigate bias, but shape AI as a technology for equality. Representative data can bring visibility to racial and gender inequalities. And if we elevate more voices, AI can be designed to meet those emerging needs. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Sohab Nunhak and I'm a project officer of the Digital Advisory Unit at the International Monetary Fund. My focus is on disruptive technologies, including artificial intelligence and blockchain. The technology assessment co-authored with Farah Awan focuses on understanding the blockchain governance of building blocks, a cash-based transfer program created by the World Programme, currently benefiting thousands of Syrian refugees in Jordan. Blockchain within building blocks enhanced the supply chain of humanitarian aid, bypassing local banks and saving funds to be redistributed, while refugees are more empowered by giving them the means to purchase food. However, there must be a consensus model and a governance structure to adopt blockchain with humanitarian partners to facilitate digital inclusion, promote resilience, and lessen inequalities. Building blocks is an effective way to achieve the Zero Hunger Sustainable Development Goal by 2030 and can be an invitation to collaborate with other humanitarian agencies to coordinate aid in the region, thus significantly reduce duplication of efforts as a result. Thank you very much.
Okay, so before moving on, I forgot to mention to please use hashtags, tech for SDGs and tech justice, if you want to share about the webinar as we go along. So now I'd like to introduce Elliott Harris, who is a macroeconomist by training, and he was previously Assistant Secretary General for the United Nations Environment, heading their office in New York. He also has a career at the IMF as an economist and is now Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and Chief Economist at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. Elliott, welcome. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for making the time to join us and frame the broad context of this webinar. The first question for you is, what are some of the ways in which technology can be a public good, and what technology trends are most concerning?
Thank you very much, Adriana. And again, thanks to the organizers for the invitation. Very pleased to be here. Technology is everywhere, and it enables modern life. I often talk about the way in which we've taken so much technology for granted because it's been around us all the time. Concrete case in point is electricity. I mean, all of us would agree that lacking access to electricity is utterly unacceptable. And we think of it as just a part of normal life. Those of us who don't have access to electricity, they suffer and are tremendously left behind. And that's one of the reasons why, for example, electricity provision in most societies is organized by public utilities. The technology is critical because it is the way in which we will be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And consequently, we have to think of the technology as the enabling framework. It is part of the means of implementation of the SDGs and of the 2030 Agenda. And its nature as a public good derives from that. We cannot possibly move towards greater sustainability without deploying technologies, and consequently the technologies are essential and therefore are something that are a benefit to us all. But there are a couple of caveats there, and that leads into some of the concerns that we see surrounding the whole issue of technological innovation. The first is that if we agree that technology is central to achieving the SDGs, it can only do so if it is accessible to everyone. Because the promise, the full benefit and potential of technology can't be fully realized unless everyone is included. And so that has to be a key for technology to be the public good that it should be. Now, of course, it's always the wealthier people and the wealthier countries that have first access to these technologies. These are innovations that generally are more expensive when they come out, and that is always going to be the case. But the problem arises if it stays that way. If the technology is reserved to those who have the means to pay for it, And that puts the poorer people within countries and the poorer countries themselves at a tremendous disadvantage, making it possible for them to be left behind. And this is exactly what is happening today. Because we have to look at the technology not only from the point of view of what kind of advantages it can bring to us, but what sorts of disadvantages it can have. And one of the primary disadvantages is that it can indeed, in fact, it does exacerbate existing inequalities unless there are policies in place to stem the tide. So the fact of the matter is, the benefits and the risks of technology are not equally distributed. We do not all have access to the technologies. We are not all equally well equipped to take advantage of them. You know? But if the technologies are capable of generating these inequalities in addition to providing benefits, then we have to address that head on if we want them to serve the purpose of attaining the 2030 agenda, because the core tenet of that agenda is to leave no one behind. And one of the ways in which we can deal with this problem is, of course, we have to make sure that people are well equipped to take advantage of the technologies as they come along. And that's education and training, ongoing and lifelong education and training. It has to be at the heart of the mix. That then raises another problem that we see, which is that our economies are rushing headlong into the digital era. More and more of our value is being produced through digital means. But the problem is that the fiscal space of governments isn't accompanying that. All of this value that's being generated in the digital space is not being effectively subject to the fiscal regime, to taxes. So that means governments are not collecting enough of the resources generated by the economies in order to be able to do what they need to do to make sure that technology is equitably available to all. And this is a real problem, because if we want to solve the problem of inequitable access to technology and inequitable impact of technology, then we have to do some of the policy interventions that I've mentioned above. We have to broaden the access to everyone. We have to equip everyone to participate in the technology. And we're trying to find a solution to this problem, not to be punitive, but in order to equip governments to play the role that they have to play if technology is going to be a force for good going forward. The last issue that I want to talk about is this question of opportunity. We have access to the technologies and then the opportunities to use them. We have existing barriers to entry in digital markets that come about because the question of access to data is not equitably distributed. You know, there are big technology-based platforms or technology companies that by nature of their activities, they have sort of primary access to this data. Very often there's a level of research and development that's needed to be able to compete on these markets. And that level of research and development is so high that it effectively excludes small startups if they don't have access to financing. And then, of course, there are the tremendous network effects that entrenched players have. And that creates a sort of built-in advantage. All of that combines to result in a high degree of market concentration in the digital space, far more than in any other sector of the economy. And that limits the choice to users and to consumers. It creates a degree of power that these big tech firms have that is perhaps more than a little worrisome. And more to the point, it locks out latecomers. Those who are just starting to innovate find it very, very difficult to establish themselves in markets, and that includes many enterprises in the global south. And all of that combines, again, to worsen the problem of inequalities of wealth and income. And the last thing that we have to think about as well is that these technologies, for all of their potential benefits, they have huge downsides. Right now, we've seen a lot of disinformation being spread around the world via the internet about the COVID crisis. We've seen people use the internet to spread hate and to incite violence. We also have problems of cybersecurity and breaches of privacy. All of these are things that are downsides, and if technology is to function as a public good, we have to address them going forward in a collective way, in ways that are suitable for all of us around the world to benefit, and not just for those who are already benefiting to the disadvantage of others. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you very much for that answer. That was really helpful for framing the overall context of what we're talking about today. And so I have another question for you. If you can address what steps the UN has taken or are planning to take to address these issues.
Well, again, the very nature of technology as a public good sort of calls the UN into the game, if you will. And we have been doing quite a bit around these issues of new technology. I can't talk about everything, but I'll try to mention some of the highlights. In 2018, the Secretary General launched what he called a strategy on new technologies. It's a way that sets out the framework within which the UN is supposed to deal with these issues. It's anchored in the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and of course, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now, that agenda itself set out from the very beginning the central role that technology is expected to play. There are three so-called means of implementation, and technology and innovation is one of them. And as a result of that, we had the technology facilitation mechanism created, and it's housed within my department in DESA, and it was created just after the 2030 agenda was adopted. And as a part of that technology facilitation mechanism, we set up the Science, Technology and Innovation Forum, which was advised and guided by the 10-member group of experts. NACI is one of the original founding members of that forum and of the 10-member group. And that is intended to bring together experts from science and technology fields, the UN system, country representatives, civil society representatives, to look at ways in which technology could help to better achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and feeds into the high-level political forum, which reviews the progress under the SDGs, and it's actually going on as we speak. Now, we also have created a system-wide roadmap for supporting capacity development for artificial intelligence. It sets out the actions that the UN is going to support member states to take on things like infrastructure, the data, the human capital development, but as also in the sort of soft infrastructure, the policies, the law, the human rights aspects of the whole question of technology. Equally important is with the rising importance of artificial intelligence, we are working under the leadership of UNESCO to develop what we call principles of ethics for artificial intelligence. And we have a draft out that is in public consultation. I encourage you all to have a look at that and to feed into this consultation process so you can bring your views to bear on this important issue. The SG has convened a high-level panel on digital cooperation, and that has provided, again, recommendations that we can act on to improve access, to improve equity and safety and the protection of human rights in the digital space. And I do think that there's quite a bit going on that is perhaps less in the way of formal initiatives, but more in the way of the way in which we interact with governments and with civil society partners to try to focus in on the benefits that technology can generate while not losing sight of the adverse impacts and the disadvantages that we have to manage if we want technology to be a force for good. I know that my colleague Shamika from UNCTAD will be here, and she will certainly be able to speak more about UNCTAD's role as Secretariat of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, which is one of the major commissions of the Economic and Social Council of the UN. So I think those are quite a few of the ways that the UN is engaged in this whole question of technology. But we mustn't forget the core principle behind it all is that we want for everyone to participate, to be brought forward to achieve a better level of life under the SDGs. Those that we are already leaving behind, they will not be able to catch up. They will not be able to catch up unless we deal with this problem of the inequitable access and the inequitable distribution of the risks and benefits of technology. Because technology is such a driving force in our societies today that this is really central to any effort to reach the SDGs.
All right, thank you. It's fascinating to see the work taking place across the UN system. And so to finish off with the last question, it seems like we need a new approach to technology governance. So in one sentence, can you give some advice for young practitioners looking to contribute to this effort and where they can start?
Well, I think the key point is that technology is going to be something that is administered at the national level, at least for the foreseeable future. What we would like is for all governments and all stakeholders to coalesce around a set of principles that should guide the way in which technology is regulated by each set of national authorities. And it is our view, and I think it's the right view, that those principles should be consistent with those three main elements that I mentioned a little bit earlier. It's the principles of the UN Charter. Yeah, we have the question of human rights that has to be at the very basis of any kind of framework for technology. And then we have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which sets out all of the basic objectives that we are trying to achieve and should be able to guide us in the types of regulations that we put in place, legislation as well, to shape the way in which technology is developed and deployed. We won't be able to anticipate everything today. But if we set up principles to guide how we use the technology, then that hopefully should shape the way in which technologies are developed and deployed for the public good. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much. I'd like to thank Elliott Harris for joining us, and let's move on to the panel discussion. I would like to introduce Robert Lepenies, our panel moderator, who's a research scientist at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, and also executive committee member at the Global Young Academy, which is an international academy of young scientists that aims to give a voice to young scientists across the globe. Robert?
Yes, thank you so much, Adriana. Let me just share my screen real quick. There we go. Great. Can you see the slides? Perfect.
Yes.
Thanks so much. I'm delighted to be part of this event. The mission of the Global Young Academy is to give a voice to young scientists across the globe. So we couldn't be happier to hear and read young scholars who think about the implications of emerging technologies on inequalities and sustainable development, and who offer solutions. So thanks for this collaborative effort to showcase young researchers. I would like to welcome our 4 distinguished panel members who will share reflections on the most pressing issues around technology systems and recommendations for overcoming challenges related to them, and highlight specific programs that are aiming at promoting technology justice. So I will introduce them and then give the floor first to Shamika Sirimanne and then the others, and at the end of it, we will have a short Q&A session. So Dr. Shamika Sirimanne is the director of the Division on Technology and Logistics of UNCTAD. She leads UNCTAD's work in science, technology, and innovation, including the work on e-commerce and digital economy. And she also serves as the head of the Secretariat of the UN Commission of Science and Technology for Development, which, and this is very important, is the focal point of the United Nations on STI, policy dialogue. So Dr. Sirimanne, we are delighted to have you with us, and you will speak first in just a bit. Afterwards, we will hear from Anissa Trianti, who is a postdoctoral researcher who's working on water and climate governance and has been an advocate for several years in youth, civil society, and young scientist engagement. Dr. Trianti holds a PhD from the University of Amsterdam with a dissertation on governance of ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, and was a young scientist representative on the UNDIR Global Science and Technology Advisory Group, and is one of the science policy focal points within the UN Major Group for Children and Youth. So welcome, Dr. Trianti. Third up, we'll have Tom Wakeford, who is an action researcher and participatory worker at the etc. Group, the technology watchdog, who's been involved in a range of participatory technology assessments over the last 25 years, been involved in many deliberative processes focusing on racism, ageism, social justice. So welcome. Last but no means least panelist is Nebojsa Nakicenovic-Naki, who is the executive director of the World in 2050 report. He was the deputy and acting director general of IASA, the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, and also tenure professor of energy economics at the TU Wien. He holds numerous positions. He's member of the Earth League, the Earth Commission of the Global Commons Alliance. He's on a long list of editorial boards of peer-reviewed scientific journals and has been active at the Science Policy Interface for many years, especially on topics of long-term patterns of technological change, economic development, and response to climate change. So thank you all for participating. I would now like to give the floor to Shamika Sirimanne. Dr. Sirimanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert, and good day to all of you. And first, let me thank the Journal of Science, Policy and Governance and the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth for inviting me to be part of this very important panel. So I think it's very clear to all of us, we are working in technology, and more broadly STI, science, technology, and innovation, and these are critical for achieving the SDGs. And UNCTAD has consistently emphasized that technological change is essential for economic growth and sustainable development. So based on UNCTAD's experience on the ground, let me first talk about how to shape technological solutions towards the SDGs. And this is not an easy thing to do. And second, based on the discussions taking place at the United Nations Commission on Science and Technology for Development, which is the focal point of the UN system for STI policy dialogue, I will briefly address the unintended consequences of frontier technologies and what to do. I think Elliott started to talk about this. Let me take it forward a bit more. United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth has been involved in shaping this discussion. I think Donovan, you have been with us at many CSTDs, and you will, the messages I bring to you will resonate very well among your groups. So both issues that I present to you are pretty much unfinished business. And I hope you would leverage your powers and your networks to advocate for them. So let me get to the shaping technological solutions towards the SDGs. See, without appropriate policies, technologies, be they old or new, are unlikely to deliver progress on the global development agenda. I know policies, regulatory frameworks are not too fashionable, but they're essential to create an enabling environment for the firms to innovate and thrive. And this is critical. In this regard, UNCTAD's STI policy reviews, we call them STIP reviews, support governments to integrate STI policies into their national development strategies so as to work towards SDGs. And we have learned several lessons on the way. So I'm going to present to you a couple of these. While we talk a lot about paying attention to breakthrough innovations designed specifically to address the SDGs, our analysis of national STI strategies shows that they rarely focus on sustainable development. Our experience from the ground is very telling. You see, while we are living through a fast-moving technological revolution, the STI ministries that are supposed to lead the national efforts are very weak in many developing countries. And they are far down in the totem pole of government ministries. You know, they are not the finance ministry, the big transport, environment ministries. STI ministry is a very small ministry tucked somewhere down below. STI ministries are grossly underfunded. They find it difficult to retain talent. So they have a weak voice in the governmental machinery. So partly because of this, there is no whole of government or a systems approach to mobilizing efforts to benefit from technologies. Getting national governments in many developing countries fit for purpose to adapt and adopt this, especially this new wave of frontier technologies, as well as all technologies, is a major unfinished business. I know this is also not discussed much, but I want to put this to you. While cash-strapped governments, especially now with COVID-19, should pay keen attention to intermediaries, the people and institutions that can bridge the technological gap. And investment in these systems are critical because we will never be able in developing world to build all the infrastructure, all the skills and everything that is needed. You need the people who are bridging, institutions that are bridging these skills and infrastructure gaps. So I am talking about extension workers who can train farmers how to use smartphone applications on crop monitoring and early warning to disasters, which themselves are based on sophisticated space technologies. And because of extension workers, farmers do not need to know how to handle remote sensing data and GIS. And take the example of public health workers who are helping communities right now to contact trace those who are exposed to COVID-19 in remote areas of countries such as Vietnam and Sri Lanka. Or those who help to compile big data through crowdsourcing by working with communities to track typhoid outbreaks, Ebola, and so forth in many parts of the world. And I'm talking about national research institutes that help firms and farms to find appropriate technologies to assist in technological learning and building innovation capacities. For example, we've done work in Ethiopia and we find very valuable national research institutes on the ground. So these skilled intermediaries are a critical technology bridge, but they are too often overlooked. And because they are also not fashionable, these are nitty-gritty of the system. Over time, many of these institutions have been weakened, especially during the structural adjustment periods in the 90s. And governments now need to pay special attention, as these intermediaries are the ones who could bring frontier technologies to the bottom billion. This has been one of our perennial recommendations in UNCTAD, and especially in our STIP reviews, but this is an unfinished business. So let me get to the second point. Unintended consequences of frontier technologies. I think a couple of your authors, Morgan mentioned that she works on these areas, and I think Elliott mentioned the unintended consequences. Let me put to you some thoughts. These new frontier technologies could have unintended consequences. We know automation and digitalization can have positive returns for people with the right skills and not for all. Elliott mentioned the winner-takes-all nature of digital technologies that can increase inequality through market concentration. And in fact, at UNCTAD's Digital Economy Report 2019, this was the big topic, the concentration of these platforms in basically two countries, in China and the US, and what is going to happen to the rest. The design of technology and how it is used can also perpetuate inequalities. Algorithm bias, I think a couple of you mentioned earlier, is a good example. So this list goes on. You see, while the impact of frontier technologies will be felt by all, not all of us are participating equally in defining the path that these technologies will follow. We need a global, inclusive dialogue about all aspects of fast technological change and its impact on society, including its normative dimension. So let me talk a bit about the normative dimension. You see, there is a growing realization among all scientists, especially yourselves, the young scientists, of the need to develop ethics, guidelines, and principles for these new technologies. Some time ago at UNCTAD, we mapped that just in artificial intelligence, over 30 principles and guidelines have been developed by academic, NGOs, governments, and industry. But they were very different from each other and sometimes with conflicting emphasis and priorities. So pointing very clearly to the need for a more comprehensive and coherent framework. So beyond AI, normative and ethical considerations also need to be deliberated across a range of other technologies, including synthetic biology, IoT, nanotechnology, drones, and also neurotechnologies. So here there's a critical role for social activism to push for technologies for good. I'm glad that ETC is on board today, and they will talk a bit more. And we like to see that the push for technologies for good in ways that align with principles of equity and inclusion, the topic of this session. So the UN Commission on Science and Technology for Development, the focal point in the system to discuss these matters, can play a central role in this dialogue. And youth groups should lead this discussion in the CSTD, because it is your world that could get badly messed up by the actions of today. In fact, UNCTAD's forthcoming Technology and Innovation Report 2020 will critically examine the possibility of frontier technologies widening existing inequalities and creating new ones, and we will come up with policy recommendations for developing countries and how to address these inequalities. So, in conclusion, while the technologies are critical for achieving the SDGs, I think we all know that, we are all converted here, not all countries are putting in place sound policies, and not all stakeholders are participating equally in defining the path that technologies will follow. So UNCTAD and CSTD will continue to strive for creating the space for an inclusive dialogue about all aspects of technological change and its impact on society. And I would like to invite you to shape that discussion. And on this account, I want to let you know the CSTD is meeting next year in May. And please be here in Geneva to shape the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sirimanne. I'm sure many participating youth will want to help shape the discussion, so we welcome very much your invitation and also look forward to the UNCTAD reports, and we will try to make SDI fashionable, as you said. Wonderful. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Trianti now, who will share her screen with us. Thank you. The floor is yours.
I hope you can all see my screen now.
It's great.
Great, thanks so much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for having me today. I'm very happy to join this webinar, and I'd like to present some of my insights regarding the technological systems and challenges, and also to share with you some of the initiatives that I have been involved with related to science and technology. So first, regarding technological system and its challenges, I think it is very important to understand what are the existing problems and challenges, and how can technology and innovation be beneficial to solve these problems. And I'd like to start first by framing the problems from the environmental perspective, since my research work are mostly focusing on environmental governance. The concept of Anthropocene and its challenges is very well fitting here. We all know that human activities to pursue development have caused many problems, including demographic, socioeconomic problems, and from the environmental perspectives, the rapid population growth, industrialization, and also urbanization has caused the degradation of environment. The anthropogenic activities also contributes to the climate change, and it is a vicious cycle. How climate change has increased the risk of disasters and also disrupt the well-being of the community and exacerbate social injustice as well. Here comes the importance of governance. How could we steer our actions to overcome these challenges of the Anthropocene? Technology and innovation comes into the picture, as it is essential to help to accelerate our actions to achieve our collective goals, which is sustainable development. Let me choose again an example of climate change problem. The most pressing issues is, of course, on how to adapt to global environmental changes. And the best version of governance should be the one that can lead to systemic and societal change. And technology and innovation has, of course, positive and also negative impacts on the way we govern the societal problems. When it is effective and appropriate, it could leverage our capacity to govern the problems, but if it's not, then it will, of course, reduce our capacity to govern the societal problems. I'd like to first provide some illustration from my past work to be able to come up with a set of conditions to improve the effectiveness of technology for SDGs. First is our work within the Global Science and Technology Advisory Group on Disaster Risk Reduction. I was appointed as one of the young scientist representatives, and the main task of STAG is actually to provide an advice to policymakers and science and technology actors on how to better use science and technology for the implementation of Sendai framework. One of the working groups that I'm involved with is called Higher Education and Capacity Building. So our main work is to promote the role of education, especially higher education, in promoting the use of science and technology. And we also try to increase awareness of the importance of investment of capacity building to young scientists, young students, young professionals, to build their an appropriate skills for the future, especially to solve the problems of uncertainties in the future. Therefore, it's very great to see that many of the initiatives, for example, the one that mentioned by the director of UNCTAD about the support to the young scientists and youth to be involved in science and policy process, We're also glad that UNDRR is very facilitative and also very supportive in terms of young scientist engagement. The other work that I wanted to showcase here is the establishment of Science and Technology Roadmap for the implementation of Sendai Framework. So as Sendai Framework has a very strong link to SDGs, so SDGs will not be achieved if we don't achieve the target of Sendai Framework. So it has 4 priority for action, 7 targets. It links very much to the monitoring of Goal 1, 11, and 13. And the roadmap itself, it was established first in 2015. It's called the Science and Technology Roadmap for the implementation of Sendai Framework. It has been recontextualized in 2019, and it serves as a guideline for policymakers and other science and technology actors to use science and technology for the implementation of Sendai Framework. I would say that the consultation process was very thorough, so it involved many different stakeholders with different backgrounds, also civil society organization, different field of science. It really shows the inter and transdisciplinary values of the exercise. And I'm very proud to say that the young scientists also very much involved in developing the idea of the recontextualization. And I'd like to highlight the 4 outcomes here that I found very relevant to the topic that we are discussing now. The first one, the assessment and the updation of data and knowledge, the importance of dissemination, monitoring and review, and capacity building. So each priority of actions are grouped based on the priority for actions of Sendai Framework, and also these 4 types of interrelated outcomes. We can see that the capacity building is very crucial as an integral part of the Science and Technology Roadmap to ensure beneficial outcomes of technology and innovation. Finally, this is my last slide on the lessons learned. I think first we need to think of technology from the systemic point of view, to understand that technology is not merely about the products, but also processes. And the problems that we are now face and try to be solved are very diverse, very dynamic, crossing scales, and also uncertain. So technology systems contain subsystems with different actors involved. So it is very important to promote partnership and collaboration. And we need to promote more capacity building, diversification of knowledge sources, including local knowledge. Listen to the community who has actually this local knowledge and the needs. And it is important to change the way we do science. We have to really move from mono to inter to transdisciplinary science, and also promote open science. We also need a stronger coordination in terms of technology governance and effective regulation. This is very crucial, especially to regulate the new emergence technology. And we need to include technology in our planning in a more programmatic way to combine short and long-term strategies. And we need an investment to deal with uncertainties. Uncertainties is very, very important. And I think technology and innovation could really have a crucial roles for us to deal with uncertainties in the future. And of course, to leverage the acceptance of technology, we need to make sure that the process of designing, of implementing, and also for assessing technology and innovation, it should be legitimate. It should be inclusive and democratic to ensure that that it will be well accepted by the community. And the last one, but most important one, is that context really, really matters. We have to understand who are the beneficiaries of the technology, and it has to be based on the fitness with the socioeconomic, cultural, and political characteristics to understand if it is really feasible to implement certain technology, and also we need to understand the implication of technology for the society. I think I'll leave it at that, and hopefully we can have more discussion later on. I will give the floor back to the moderator. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Anissa, for this wealth of information. I think there was lots to take in. The main point is that we need a systemic approach, and we can, whether we are scientists and we move from mono to inter to transdisciplinary science, or we help engage in capacity building, we need to engage the youth and young scientists for this. Thank you for linking Sendai and the SDGs, for making this link so explicit. And I hope there will be also questions from the audience coming in about this later. You can still send them in the chat to the moderators if you want to. Next up, so thank you. Next up is Tom Wakeford from the Etc. group. Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'd like to repeat the thanks to the organizers. It's really great to be part of this important event, and it seems technology is really a big part of the response to COVID-19, and I'll come back to that. So ETC Group, for those that don't know it, we're a small international civil society organization. We work towards democratic control of technologies. We also monitor new technologies. And I guess our answer to the question of how technology is made for the public good is that some democratic control makes it more likely it will be for the public good. And we don't see ourselves as inherently anti-technology or pro-technology, or even that technology is neutral, that it just depends what you do with it. We see technology as a political, we need to take a tech political approach. So I brought along a real hammer to reflect what's on the screen. And when you take a bit of technology like this hammer, we need to look at several aspects of it. Who decided we needed the hammer? What practices might it have displaced? What did it take to bring the hammer into being? Who forged the metal? Where did the handle come from? What's the impact? And you can apply this to any technology. Who decides who can use it? And how does it change hands? What about the trade in all the elements? So by taking this tech political approach, we can also see that some technologies lock us in. In fact, a lot of technologies lock us into particular ways of living and certain power relations. So if we take, for example, sorry, I'll just use an old quote here from during the Second World War, when Parliament was bombed and destroyed. Winston Churchill said, as they were planning the rebuild, we shape our buildings and then the buildings shape us, referring to the two sides of the chamber of the House of Commons. And more recently, one of my colleagues, Gopal Dayaneni, has extended this to technology, saying corporations shape our technologies and then our technologies shape us. And just to give an example of that, if we look at pesticides and more recently GM crops, we've been seeing how corporations promoting pesticides in the beginning, they would deal with a pest, but then the pest would develop resistance. The pesticide would get less and less results, or the same as applied to GM crops. And then you get in a cycle of dependence on a corporation and actually farmers suffering from being locked into a particular set of technologies, because going back to a chemical-free and agroecological approach becomes harder and harder. So that leads us into the main thing I wanted to say, what we're working on in ETC a lot, as Sirimanne kindly referred to, is technology assessment. So why assess technologies? Well, the main reason you assess the technology is so that you don't regret the resources you spend developing it to the science and the application of that science, but also you don't regret the results of it, and you don't find that it was a mistake. So if we take, for example, large-scale factory fishing, the huge trawlers, if there had been a proper technology assessment, many countries might have decided the interests of their small-scale fisher folk might mean they didn't develop it in the same way. Similarly, we're all using these high technologies right now for our Zooms, our smartphones and our laptops. These were developed and then are now being built, particularly in countries of the global south, as you know, predominantly there. But the assessment of the effects of these very toxic chemicals like benzene on the workers were actually known, but very little was done. And I think the issue of them being made in the global south is relevant. An economist at the Tricontinental Center has calculated that if an iPhone was made in a country such as the US or the EU with proper worker safety standards, they would cost, each iPhone would cost $30,000 US. And finally, at the bottom right of this orange diagram, you can see slightly orange golden rice. And this was something that could have gone through a proper technology assessment. Instead, it's been a technology that hasn't yielded the benefits. In fact, it's completely misunderstood the problem of lack of vitamin A among many rural people in the world, and didn't look at issues of diet and the problem of subsidies of rice and all sorts of other things. So there's another example of where technology assessment would be useful. So let's just finish with a couple of examples of technology assessment. So we call these technology assessment platforms, and I'll take one example from South Asia and another from Latin America. Quite a few years ago now, I was involved with some colleagues at ETC and many other civil society organizations in a technology assessment of golden rice, actually, and among other technologies in the state of Andhra Pradesh in India, South Asia. And there you can see on the right of the right-hand picture there, somebody from Syngenta, which was developing golden rice, trying to explain its benefits to a community who gave the technology the thumbs down. They said they didn't address the needs they had. And if you want more details, there's a website you can go to. It's called Prajatipu People's Verdict. Much more recently, ETC for the last 6 or 7 years has been working on the network to evaluate technologies across Latin America, the RED TECLA. You can just type that in and find more details about it. ETC's been developing videos explaining synthetic biology, which is already affecting communities in Latin America through the artificial synthetic production of stevia, which is a crop in many parts of Latin America. So just to finish with, we would say technologies aren't just tools to transform social ecological relationships for a purpose, but actually that we need a fuller definition, and that would be including seeing technologies as a complex set of relationships, of resources and power over time. And I think with COVID-19, we've really seen how some corporations have used digital technologies to make vast billions. I think 63 billion profit is what Amazon made in the first 3 months of the year using all these digital technologies. But actually, what it's also shown, and our report, Who Will Feed Us, highlighted years ago, and it's only been reinforced by COVID-19, that actually smallholder farmers using already existing technologies, not those that are seen as high-tech and high-intensive chemical use, have actually been supporting the food security of people in both global north and global south through local food webs. So thanks very much, Robert. I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Tom, for arguing for the need for bottom-up technology assessment and highlighting issues of power and power symmetries, which are always inextricably linked to technology and the need to share technology equitably. I would like to share the floor. I would like to give the floor now to Naki, who will share his screen.
Thank you very much, Robert. I'm delighted to be part of this webinar, and I would like to say a few words about the World in 2050 initiative. You know, we are at a very important juncture. There is only 10 years left to 2030. So I think technology will have a very important role to play. Let me share my screen with you to show you a few slides. We have just launched last week at the high-level political forum the new report of the World in 2050 on innovations for sustainability. It is about the pathways toward an efficient and sufficient post-pandemic future. This is the third report that we have done in a network of about 120 people all around the world. The first one was about the 6 transformations to achieve sustainable development goals and about the pathways to get there. And the second one was about one of the major challenges facing humanity, and that is the digital revolution. So let me just show you what is one of the key points of the current report, and you can download it from the website that I've shown. If you look horizontally, we have human well-being, and vertical, the provision of the basic services. And until now, basic access was the point, and that's not sufficient, because many people are left behind. 3 billion cook with solid fuels, 2 billion do not have access to clean water, and so on. And I think that the COVID-19 crisis has amplified everything that is good and bad somehow in our societies. I have to submit, I was infected beginning of March, and it is a very difficult disease, and in particular, those excluded suffer the most. On the other side, we have people who overconsume. And that is about sufficiency, because, for example, there are almost as many obese people in the world as there are those who go hungry every night. So this sufficiency corridor was the approach we have taken in order to achieve sustainable, safe, and just future for all. And I think this is really important for the youth and children that will be living and designing our future over the coming decades. Let me just give you an example of what I mean by that. You can see on the left, Motorola 6200 phone that was launched in 1992, but that was the first GSM phone, and below, a smartphone. Now, a smartphone needs about 5 watts of energy. If you compare that to the devices it has replaced in the middle, they would have needed about 100 times as much energy. So efficiency is the way to provide better services, decent life for everybody, while reducing the material and other needs. By the way, on the materials, a smartphone needs about 25 times less materials than the analog devices it replaced. And we looked in this report at the energy issues. The leverage is about 7 to 1. If you reduce energy services through efficiency by 1 unit, you avoid 7 units of energy. For water, the ratio is 6 to 1. For materials, even 8 to 1. And if you assume shared ownership in the future and circular economy, then the ratio might be even larger. So this is one of the key points in our report, that it is about too little and too much, and efficiency could be the solution to that. And now the digital technologies, or the digital revolution that will be with us over the next few decades, offers many more opportunities. Let me just show you some, I think, really exemplary cases. This is a heart that was printed by the 3D printer at Tel Aviv University with human tissue. It's non-functional, but it's an implication of what might be happening. Then pills that can do diagnostics and deliver medicine to the important parts of the body. A really scary part about the new digital technologies in the Anthropocene is who will be responsible for the weapons that might act on their own. How do we socially steer this development? Another technology that was developed for military purposes, exoskeletons, but can benefit people a lot. And the point I'm trying to make, it's not individual technologies, it is their convergence into the new systems, and that was mentioned before, into the new systems that is important for achieving the SDGs in the long run, and changing our societies in a more just and safe way, and also avoiding the damage of the planetary system. So, our overall approach framework in the world in 2050, and as I said, you can download all of the reports, including the new ones and policy briefs from the website you see below, www.pwi2050.org. Now, our approach is to say that we need accelerated action and a grand transformation because the legitimacy of business as usual is eroding. Again, COVID-19 is a good example, but many societies were not able to react appropriately to it. I think also youth movements like Fridays for Future are a good indication that we must change. We must move away from the status quo. This is indicated by the transformation to the 17 SDGs by 2030, but that's not the end. We have to think long-term. We have to have a vision of a just and fair future for everybody within the planetary boundaries, and that's illustrated in the long run. And I would like to submit that we need to see technology and technology systems in a broader social context. So to achieve the SDGs over the next 10 years and go beyond, to achieve the vision, we will need new values and norms. I would argue even more morality, new morality and ethics. And I hope that the children and youth will bring that around over the coming decades. So let me come to the conclusion, share with you only 5 key points. The first is that the world is at the crossroads. The 2030 agenda is achievable, but will require really accelerated action and transformative pathways. COVID-19 and many pandemics to come are a huge threat to humanity, but also they're an opportunity. Billions have been pledged to build back, but I would say we have to build forward. We have to build the type of technologies I briefly referred to. And 2050 indicates that transformations are required as an entry point to accelerated action. SDI is at the core of human development. Others have mentioned that before me. Paradoxically, it brings many negative effects. I mentioned the issue of social steering. It's not clear how to do that, but it is also the solution at the same time. And then last but not least, some of the technologies I've indicated, like mobile phones, it's a great success. Almost everybody has a mobile phone after 30 years in the world. These kind of small size granular technologies are the ones that generally diffuse faster and can be adopted faster, and therefore are yet another leverage for rapid change toward the sustainable future for all. Well, I would stop here. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Naki. Yes, there's need to build back and build forward, as you say. And I want to thank you again on behalf of everyone for all of your presentations, which were so intriguing that we lost view of time just a little bit. So the hosts kindly asked me to skip Q&A. But there's a good news in this, which is that some of you have been already signaling that they will be participating in the breakout rooms. So our participants will have a chance to interact in the breakout rooms with you, even though they will not get answers to the questions that they nicely submitted through the chat just now. So please participate in the breakout rooms if you can and meet some of the panelists there. And with this, I would like to thank the panelists again and over to Adriana.
Great, thank you so much for all your really informative presentations. So we'll move into breakout rooms for about 15 minutes or so. There are roughly about 15 people in each, so hopefully it'll be a nice discussion. We tried to match you based on your preference, but maybe a little randomized as well, so just bear with us. We will, so I said, we'll do this for 15 minutes. I'll send a 1-minute warning to come back into the rooms. And the rooms that you're assigned to, as you can see here, 1 through 5 represent the topics that are here. So technology governance, AI data, education, digital inclusion, humanitarian affairs, and planetary protection. And they'll be moderated by a lot of the authors that you've heard from. So hopefully it'll be a nice conversation. Okay, so with that, let me stop this and open the rooms. Okay, hi everybody. We hope you had a good conversation in the breakout room. So we were hoping to be able to wrap up for a couple of minutes each, but in the interest of time, we'll have to cut this short. But we'll make sure to send you notes and answers to the questions that you had. And hopefully This is just the start of this conversation, and we'll look forward to more discussions on this topic in the future. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you to our panelists and moderators, as well as all the participants who joined us today from all over the world. Thank you.